On this episode of Take This Down, I have with me Mr. Barry King, and we're going to talk a little bit about his growing up in Louisville, Kentucky, growing up around Cassius Clay, his love and desire to grow up to be the successful artist he is today, and how he overcame dealing with depression. You're not going to want to miss this episode. You're going to want to take this down. Barry, I appreciate you joining me today on Take This Down podcast. It's a privilege and an honor. I truly have been looking forward to this conversation. So thank you.
Absolutely.
You know, it's a tradition of mine. I always, tell my guests why I wanted to invite them on the show and have this conversation. You know, unfortunately, to know you and still getting to know you and what I've grown to learn about you, you're the most interesting man I know. and I truly mean that. And hearing your story.
You say that to all the guests.
I promise you I don't. And if I do, I mean it down. No, I'm just joking. But really and truly, learning more about your story from your upbringing to some different things that you've overcome or even the successes that you had is wow. Yeah. Wow. And I know I mentioned to you off camera, but if I had half of your success or half of your story, then I've lived a good life.
It's all a blessing, man. It all comes from above. I have no idea how it all happened. So, no, it is funny.
Well, let's just get right into it.
Sure.
So, who is Barry King at his core?
Barry King at my core, it's funny, my mother, she taught us that we're 5 things. And she said, you're Barry, part of the King clan, you're male, you're black, and you're American. She said, of those 5, there's only one place that God will reside and help you, and that's just Barry. She said, like if I was to take my family and you and I were in a dispute, and I'm like, well, my family's this and your family, and then I started asking God to help me help my family. He doesn't enter into that. So although he created all 5 of those things, and everybody's one of those 5, you'll become more, she said. So for me, I'm Barry. I'm proud to be part of the King family. I'm proud to be black. I'm proud to be American. Proud to be male. But of those things, I just try to live my life as Barry.
That it sounds simple, but that's a lot to unpack because, I think sometimes we go through life trying to be all those different things instead of focusing on that one most important part.
Yeah, she used to say kind of, if you look at the world, kind of the turmoil is because we all want to pick one of those things and we identify with that first. And even though you and I are both, African-American males, you're Ty and I'm Barry.
Right.
And so, your camera guy, young white guy, it doesn't matter. We have to come together as who we are, because if we come together based on race, we're going to feel fear. And when we live our life with fear, that's why, to me, why the country and the world's where it's at today.
And that's a lot to unpack, but I'm going to go
sure.
We'll walk a little bit slower line than that, but I like where we're going with the conversation. And so with just hearing what your mom instilled with you, sounds like you had a very, family-oriented, very structured upbringing. Talk a little bit about your, how you grew up.
Well, my mom and dad very much, just traditional. I mean, very much we had to follow rules. You had boundaries and all that stuff. So just an old-fashioned, when I moved to Texas, I remember I called her and said, hey, Mom, George Bush, the governor, he started this thing called No Pass, No Play. She said, yeah, me and your dad started that. Because, me and my older brother, we had some pretty tough punishments for not keeping our word about what we were supposed to do. So, but it was loving. But yet you knew the boundaries.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, if my memory serves me well, you grew up in Louisville, Kentucky.
Right.
I can't think of the famous boxer that's from Louisville, Kentucky.
Talking about Cassius Clay.
Cassius Clay.
Muhammad Ali.
Yeah. If I'm, you're connected to Muhammad Ali.
Yeah. My dad trained him for his first pro fight, George King. And first fight was in Louisville against West Virginia chief of police. I forget the town, named Tunney Hunsaker. And my dad I've got pictures and a little short video of him coming out of the ring, But he came. Then he was still Cassius at that point. He came to my older brother George's 12th birthday party, and he was like a big kid. He ate a whole bowl of potato salad and, ran around with all us kids. But it was amazing times.
So how was it growing up with the young Cassius Clay and seeing him kind of morph into, this, not only just the fun-loving Cassius Clay that we've seen or documented, or I should say I've seen and read about, but you've seen firsthand, to ultimately when you ran into him again, as now he's Muhammad Ali.
He would come home. I mean, in fact, my older brother and I were in Chicago, and our mom was in a car accident. We didn't know about it. We were there for the summer with our cousin, and he heard about it. And I think he wasn't in town, but he came to Louisville to see my mom and check on her. He just, he was always, even though he was Cassius, he was just always who that person was.
Gotcha.
My dad said, and just bigger than life. Yeah. When you looked at him, you thought, man, this is a hero. This is a real superhero. So he was just amazing.
And so growing up with your father being, the boxing trainer for Muhammad Ali, did you grow up wanting to be a boxer?
So one time he came home, that was after he had his jaw broke by Ken Norton. And his mouth was wired shut, so he could still talk. He was still going to talk. So he came home, and my dad, we went around the corner to where he was at some friend's house that he was at. And so he hadn't seen me in a number of years. I think I was about 14. And so he asked my dad, he said, look, man, Barry, he's getting tall. And he put his arm out, and he said, put your arms up. He said, so is any of them boxing, George? And my dad said, no, none of them box. So he said, you look like you could box. You're kind of tall. I said, yeah. I said, no, I'm an artist. And I said, but I'll draw me beating anybody you want to see. So he kind of laughed. He said, oh, yeah, you got that lip, huh? I said, well, so.
Now, you just said you're an artist. When did you decide, or you knew that you wanted to be an artist, or that part of you was developed?
Well, it's funny. Anything my older brother did as a kid, I wanted to do. And so we would draw, when I was first, second, third grade, we would draw beatniks. And so then third grade, I entered an art contest. I did a painting of Jim Brown. I'm sure it looked like a kid's painting, but I guess it was pretty good. So I entered it in a UNICEF for Children art show. And it was a worldwide art show for kids. And they had, I think, different levels and all. But anyway, so I was shocked when the art superintendent came to our school and to my class and gave me the award, said I'd won grand prize for them. And so that was it, man. That just knocked me out. And from that moment on, so then I went to Free Public Library in Louisville. One summer they had art classes. And so I went. And so the first class I went to, my mom picked me up and my dad. So they asked me to have a good time. And I was kind of quiet. I said, yeah. And my mom was like, is everything all right? I said, yeah. Teachers okay? Yeah. Students, kids, yeah. She said, good. I said, but I don't want to go back. And she said, why don't you want to go back? I said, I don't know. I just don't want to go back. She said, do you want to be an artist? And I said, well, yeah, I want to be an artist. She said, well, then you have to go back. So when I was about 16, 17, I remembered that. And so by then I'm drawing and doing church programs and all kind of things. And I asked her, I said, Mom, you remember that time I didn't want to go back? And she said, to the Free Public Library art classes when I was like in fourth grade. She said, yeah, I remember that. I said, do you know why I didn't want to go back? She said, of course I know why you didn't want to go back. She said, do you know why you didn't want to go back? I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure I know why I didn't want to go back. She said, well, why? I said, because I think it was two things. I think it was the first time I had been away from my brother at some place just by myself and my family. And then I think I didn't feel comfortable because I don't remember, but I was probably one of the few Black kids in that class. And so I said, but I think it was more the latter. I think it was because I didn't feel comfortable because our neighborhood, growing up in a, all Black neighborhood pretty much. And she said, well, yeah, that's why you didn't go back. I said, well, why didn't you have a talk with me about that? She said, because your dad's job and my job was to make sure if that's what you want to do it. She said, you don't have a conversation about race with kids that young. She said, if we distract you and start talking about that, then that gives you feel an inferiority complex, and you have to kind of fight through that. And she said, our job is if you want to be an artist, then go to take the class, do the classes, and continue to be an artist.
I love hearing the fact that, and I'm gonna not to minimize or summarize incorrectly, that your parents protected your innocence.
Exactly.
That they knew that, hey, my son wants to be an artist. We're going to focus on the art and not all the extra noise because that wasn't your place. And they knew that.
Right. When I look at my grandson, he's 4.5. I think sometimes when is he going to not just be Ari, my wife's Liz going to kill me for that. Because I call my son my grandson, so I get those names mixed up. But I said, when is he going to stop being Ari and then have to bring all this other things, those other 4 things that I talked about? Mm-hmm. The world will make him feel like he has to make a choice about those things. And my goal is that he will always just remember that he's Ari.
And so with your core values and a very strong upbringing, did you go off to school to pursue art? Or?
Yeah, it's funny. I went to private art school in Annapolis, John Hearn School of Art, and didn't feel comfortable there. It was a very expensive school and a lot of rich kids. I wasn't a rich kid, so I left after about a month and a half. And then I went to Murray State University, and that was a 4-year school. In my high school, I had art, commercial art, graphic design, 3 years, 3 hours a day. And my senior year, I was in art 6 hours a day because my English teacher was the art advisor of the yearbook and the school newspaper. So when I got to Murray State, I didn't want to be a school teacher, art teacher. And so we kind of fell out. I always wanted to be graphic design. And so I left there and I went to Ivy Tech College, which is a regional school across Indiana. And I went to the Sellersburg College in southern Indiana, took commercial art and got a 2-year degree there. And so.
Yeah, so focus, what drew you to graphic art?
I think because of my high school, the classes that I was taking, those 3 hours a day for junior and freshman year, sophomore year, and then my senior year, I did 3, like I said, the 3. So that was a very intense graphic design. We learned everything, lettering, typesetting, all kind of things.
You hear the saying, starving artist. Was that ever a fear of yours, or you were always, no, this is what I want to do regardless?
No, I knew I could have a career. I like graphic design, logos and that stuff. But at the same time, I was doing fine art because my first piece that I sold, I was in an art show, but the first piece I sold to a celebrity was the singer Billy Paul. And it was some friends of my dad's who knew Billy Paul, and they commissioned me to do a portrait of him. So that was my first piece. I sold pieces to Muhammad Ali, and they have a copy of one of the pieces in the Ali Center in the giving room. And so he wrote me a note on the picture, and then it's hanging in our house. And then I sold the Marvin Gaye portrait, yeah.
And so I think this is a perfect time. We can kill the suspense because you are still to this day a very well accomplished, artist. And,
Thank you. Thank you.
I would be remiss if I didn't give you opportunity to at least plug your website, what your arts, at least go
It's
check
real
it out.
simple. BarryKingArt.com.
Yeah. And if you haven't seen any of Barry's art, I think you'll be blown away. And I'm still, I go to your website periodically to look at it. And, I will say I can't afford everything, but maybe one of these days I will. I'm just teasing.
No, I do commission work. I'm working on a piece right now that someone commissioned me to do of Toni Morrison. I was in an exhibit for African American Black History Month at the Bush Library in Dallas and did a portrait of his mom, Barbara, called Miss Barbara, and presented that to President Bush and his wife, Laura.
Oh, wow.
So he wrote me a real nice note.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, we're just getting started. So far we've heard about, your artwork for Muhammad Ali and now for President Bush. And, it's, like I mentioned, very...
Yeah, it's interesting. And so when I graduated, I came to Texas, came to Dallas, and I was working in a Zelle store in Louisville. And I used to bug the president about coming to Dallas. So when I graduated, they hired me and moved me to Dallas, and I worked at Zales in the advertising department for the catalog showroom. And then I was with the company 5 years, 4 years in Dallas. And then I was hired at a Radio Shack and was 22 years there. Started out as senior graphic designer and assistant art director, creative director. And then I was the first Black vice president at Radio Shack.
Gotcha. And so what point in that career did you kind of transition to commercials and other type of...
Well, I didn't go to school. I mean, we were doing national commercials, and we'd sign Howie Long, Terry Hatcher, Vanessa Williams, Ving Rhames, and a number of celebrities. So we had this campaign, you've got questions, we've got answers. And so I just was, my job was, I had 75 people that worked for me, art directors and writers and all. And so I just observed. And so one day, one of the directors, Matt Penn, said to me, he said, "You could do this." And I said, "Really? You think so?" He said, "Oh, yeah." And so started just observing. And so then I started kind of directing a few of the commercials. And then one of our directors, Nick Cassavetes, who did the movie The Notebook, he calls me one summer and says he wanted me to be in the movie John Q with Denzel. And I'm like, "You don't have to do that to get work." And he said, "No, I want you to do it." I said, "I've seen you on the set and I know you can handle it." And so he was famous for putting his friends and different people in movies. And so I played a personnel manager in a factory, and Denzel comes in and I do the interview. And so it's just weird that's not,
I mean, you sit here and you just so casually say, "Oh, I was in John Q," which is one of Denzel's most, biggest movies. And you also have a very meaningful part of that movie, which kind of creates the spiral for what ultimately happened. And you just said, no.
Well, it's funny because Leah's the one said, when we read the script, she read the script, and Leah said to me, she said, "Well, they can't cut you out of the movie." I'm like, "What are you talking about? They can always cut. You can always end up on the cutting room floor." She said, "No, you're too instrumental. You're the one that makes him go over the edge and this." She said, "So no, you'll definitely be in the movie." So that was, it's surprising. It's funny. I get friends. People have called me and, "Man, I was watching television." People I haven't heard from in years. "Was that you in that movie?" I said, "Yeah, that was me." So.
And so now you're a big movie star.
No.
And, is there other opportunities to be in movies or commercials or one time?
No, that was just one time. It's funny. There's a thing called a Taft-Hartley law that you can be in one without joining the union and all that. So I still get residual checks every month. Every quarter I get a check, and so that's kind of funny. I mean, it's enough to go to McDonald's or something.
You're paid active.
Yeah.
That's good.
But yeah, it's funny. Who was it? Somebody found my name on IMDb, there in the credits and all that stuff. So, it's strange.
Gotcha. And so, you have this very successful professional career, well accomplished, at what point, or if there is a point, he's like, okay, I feel like I've reached the pinnacle, or I don't want to do something different?
Well, in 2007, my brother and I started a gourmet sauce company, and we just had a barbecue sauce, and we had ended up with 3 barbecue sauces, a wing sauce, and we were in Central Market. We were in about 11 states across the country, and we were Central Market, Market Street, Whole Foods, Kroger, and then we ended up having to close it down. I had some illness, and then the co-packer we were using was bought by the main product they were making, because we got really good pricing because we were using some of the same ingredients. They bought another company that our co-packer was using. So they, that kind of forced us out because they just needed so much production line.
How did you go from, this career with, Tandy Radio Shack to being a pit master developing a barbecue sauce that's sold across 11 states?
Well,
I got to hear the transition.
Well, real quickly, my dad and my brothers, my younger brother, Daryl, who was a chef in Phoenix, and my older brother, George, who's been a headmaster. Them and my dad were going to do a cook-off, and I'm living in Texas, and they didn't even think I'd want to be interested. I'm like, what are you talking about? So we all decided to do this cook-off, and everybody was supposed to make their own sauce. So I called Daryl, and I'm like, how do you make barbecue sauce? He said, just go to the store, get some ketchup, and then grab stuff off the shelf you like, put in it, and see what happens. And so I did it. Luckily, I did it one time. I wrote it down, and then I, started making it. And so a friend of mine that used to work at Radio Shack, Steve Dunning, his son, Steve, I would give it to friends and family and stuff. And so Steve would only serve it to his family if he poured it on the plate. So his son, I think he was probably about 9, he said, Dad, you act like this stuff's gold. So when we started the company, me and my brother, we didn't care about having our last name on the jar or anything. So we just decided to name it. The company was called Brothers Sauces, and then the sauce was the first one we called Brothers Gold.
Gotcha.
So that was it. And we were number 1 sauce at Central Market for a number of years. And yeah.
You still know how to make Brothers Gold?
Oh yeah, I still make it.
I'm still waiting for them to try it.
All right, well, I'll get you a jar.
Okay. And so you transition, you're running.
Yeah, so I do that, and then it kind of got to where we tried to find pricing, somebody that could make our sauce competitively, and we just couldn't. So, our dad always said, don't let your ego get in the way of your good common sense. So we ended up just shutting it, but, we didn't want to shut it where we were losing money, sometimes people just keep hanging on.
Right.
We hated losing it. Still, I'll go in Central Market and they tell me people still come in and ask for it 6-7 years later. But, so I was going through that and just some depression, and, you feel a worthlessness, when you've had the successes, and you kind of go, well, maybe this is it. And I deal with depression. I was diagnosed with depression 32 years ago. So I just hit a point where it's like, I didn't want to be here.
You're very open about, battling and handling and living with depression, and I've seen and you've heard your story, and I don't know if my whole audience is familiar with, but if you're comfortable, love to kind of hear your story from where you were with your depression to how you are here still today. Well,
I always say it this way: your audience should have never met me. In fact, I think you and I met. I was going through that very traumatic bout of depression in 2016, and I met you just a few years ago. Yeah. We all had dinner, our wives, and so you should have never met me. And so what happened, I was just so depressed on this one particular day, and I tell people, when you're at a point where you want to take your life, the reason you're trying, for me, I can't speak for everyone, But me as a survivor on this side of it, I can say what I think a lot of people go through is you feel a certain pain. It's not a Tylenol pain. It's not a pain that, and you just want it to stop. So I'd been kind of feeling this pain for a while, and you end up. And so on that particular day, I'd taken my mother-in-law to the doctor. No one knew where I was mentally. I can't even say I knew early in the day, but I just hit a point that day. And so that night, Leah went to bed. I was usually downstairs working on the computer, doing some drawing or something. So she thought I was downstairs, which is where I was. And then I left. And so when I left, I went and checked into a little hotel. And just so happened, and I don't know what your audience beliefs are, and that's all personal. But for me, I think what happened, she heard my iPad make a ding, because whenever you use my my bank card, it would send a message if it's over $50. Well, the hotel was over $50. She heard the ding, but she didn't think anything about it. And so when I checked in, so then I go and I sent letters to my brothers and my son and all, and to her. And so when I checked in, I was very calm about it. It's like, and here's what's weird. Here's this, sometimes there's something that'll stop you. So I think, because it wasn't the first time I've ever contemplated it, but you think like, oh, I don't want to do that. It'll hurt my wife. It'll hurt this. It'll hurt that. I just, on my way to the hotel, that night was the same night Muhammad Ali died.
Wow.
That did not stop. Because usually I would have like, oh man, I need to go home and go to the funeral and all that. I was so finished with this life and wanting that pain to stop. So I go in, I take all my prescription meds, and I took 124 pills, prescription medicine, which was enough. And I read about it before, me, I'm going to get the details down. Yeah. And so I read about the medicines that I have. I didn't take the bottles because I didn't want them to find what I had taken. I'd taken everything in a Kleenex. And so once I took it, as I'm reading about it, it was enough to say, if you take this much, it'll kill you. If it doesn't kill you, it'll leave you with something wrong, physically, organs or something. So I took enough to kill 4 people. Wow. So when I think of that, and so then I go, and so then Leah calls, and when she comes downstairs, I'm not there, my car's gone. She calls, tries to make a person's report. They say, well, he's grown and hadn't been 24 hours and all that. So she remembered hearing that iPad, and she looks at it and sees that I checked it into the hotel and called the hotel, and they said, yeah, he's here. And so she asked them to go check. So they came back and said, he's just, he's asleep. And by then, that was a couple hours after I had taken the meds. And so she said, call the police. And the police, they came, found me, and rushed me to John Peter Smith Hospital. And so I was in a coma for 3 days. And my body was shutting down, organs, blood pressure, 60/30. I mean, they asked her, did I have a DNR? Because they could not bring me back. And so on the 3rd day, I woke up. And so when I look back, I don't need the Pope. I don't need anyone. I know there's a God. I know that personally, because you should have never met me.
First, I appreciate, you being willing to be vulnerable, but also sharing your story, because you never know who the sound of your voice is going to impact the touch. But, I think it's important, it's unintentional, but, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And obviously there's a lot of people who live with depression and that don't come out on the other side on that 3rd day. So,
no, so when I get out, people don't realize when you try to commit suicide, you lose all your rights in terms of making decisions. And it's not like your family. So what happens in John Peter Smith, they have a judge there. And so the judge determined I needed to go into mental treatment center, mental health hospital. And that was my 3rd time that I had been. So that Monday, they took me to a hospital, and I knew I needed to go. I didn't fight it. And so I was there for about a week. And so then I came home and, when I come out, I'm asking God, like, what do you want me to, why did you keep me here? What am I supposed to do? And so what I determined was that I would dedicate the rest of my life to telling my story and doing anything I could do to try to remove the stigma of depression and suicide and all that stuff.
And how do you go about doing that? Because, I see Barry from the external, and, I see a very successful businessman who had this great life, but obviously we don't know what goes on inside of people. So how do you go about your advocacy, if you will?
It's funny, a friend of mine introduced me to a woman who her daughter had committed suicide. Her and her husband's daughter had committed suicide, so called the Jordan Elizabeth Harris Foundation. So they asked me and, interviewed me and heard my story and we talked. And so I'm on the board there. And Tom and Ellen Harris are just amazing people. And in fact, this will be 10 years that they've lost their daughter. And they do the organization does a lot of great work in the city and, in Texas here. But I know that they trade it all to have Jordan back. I wasn't lucky enough to get to meet Jordan, but you can, her spirit's there. The things that we've been able to do as an organization have been pretty successful and helped a lot of people.
That's awesome. You mentioned that this is something that you've, endured in battle for 32 years and,
right.
and not to get, make this, go back to one of the 5 things about being
sure.
Black. But, mental health is not often something that's talked about or pushed to the side in, minority communities.
Well, minority communities, men especially, we don't open up. What I love is the fact that a lot of professional athletes in the last, say, 3 to 5 years have started to tell their stories. It's just, I tell people, and I'm better at taking my antidepressants. I'm as good at taking my antidepressants as women are at taking birth control pills or any pill you need to take. In essence, mental illness is no different than a physical illness. I take blood pressure. If you got high blood pressure, you take that. Well, my brain doesn't make serotonin, so I need to have something that supplements that. If I don't, then,
Right.
So I try to just convince people it's no different because it's mental and it's not anything that makes you, you shouldn't feel embarrassed about it. It is what it is.
Right.
That's the way I view it.
No, that's good. That's good. And I'm glad that, whatever God put you through and had you go through, that you came on the other side and I was able to meet you and still have you here today.
To me, it's like, no way am I comparing me in terms of stature to a Magic Johnson. But in my own small way, I try to do what he did with AIDS, HIV. And, he changed this world because here people saw this big strapping athlete and like, oh my God, he's got it. And he said, he's still alive, very successful. That's not the primary part of who he is, but he will talk about that. So, for me, it's just whoever my words may help, then I've done what God kept me here to do. That's the way I view it. More than art, more than anything. Kept me here to do that. And then second, to be Leah King's husband and Ian King's dad, and Ari King's grandfather.
It's funny. It's almost like you're reading my mind because where I was going to go in your story that you talk about, you mentioned, your wife, Leah,
right.
Being there and essentially finding you and
sure.
even creating this whole, the place to put you back. How is it being married to such a strong woman? I feel like I'm married to a strong woman, but, sometimes men have a hard time of taking a back seat.
It's funny. Leah and I, before we were married, we talked about our belief system. And, we're very traditional in terms of Christian belief system and our roles, my role as a husband and dad and all that. But I try to tell young guys, because you're the head of the household, that means protecting the family. Doesn't mean you're making all the decisions. She's far smarter. She's the smartest person I've ever known. And she's so smart in areas that I could only dream about. So you find that balance in terms of those things. But, I think guys, and I think the younger guys that are coming up behind, well, you're behind me.
It's not that long. You never are too far.
But, the guys that are coming up behind me and even behind you, they're just smarter. They're not into, they're not so materialistic and things in terms of getting hired. I read articles about, they care about what the company's social strategy, what are they into? What do they care about? Not so much about how many vacation days and all that stuff. And so it's just, hopefully, but I think that's, whether they know it or not, that I think it's kind of that they're who they are.
I'm going to say this. I say this jokingly, but I joke with my uncles about this, and I'm not trying to put an age on you or anything like that, but I tell them, I said, you 70s men are cut from a whole different cloth than other generations.
Yeah, I'm 67, we'll be 68, but yeah.
And so I say that to, you hearing you, how you place it in perspective. We're traditional in a sense, but I understand my wife is stronger in some areas, and I'm gonna lift her up rather than trying to silence her. So that's, I would say it's not a lot of 70s men, like, 1970s men, as I jokingly say, that have that type of belief. So hearing that from you.
I've lived a lot of life, and personal life and family life as a kid. And, my parents ended up divorced, but it's funny that when it came to these three boys, they could get together. They got together when it came to making sure we were following the rules and being in line and all of that. And it's one of the most beautiful stories I've ever heard was when my mom was passing. My mom got sick, and, she had to come to Texas to live out the final days of her life. And my older brother, George, flew her on a plane here. And so they were at the airport in Louisville. And then all of a sudden up walks our dad. And they had been married at 16 and 18. He was 18, she was 16. And even though by then, they had been divorced probably 35, 40 years. But you always knew they were the love of each other's lives. And so my brother said he looked up, and here comes Daddy coming to the airport to see my mom off. And so he walked off and gave them their time. So, divorce is a horrible thing, but man, nothing beats love. Right. There's just nothing that can beat love in this world. It'll ultimately win out.
Right.
Even what's going on in this world, country, whatever.
I 100% agree. I think love is one of the most important things a person can feel and to have.
Yeah.
But you just mentioned it then, and like what's going on in the world, and you talking about it now, and you're not a shy person with your thoughts and belief, and when you see, I'm going to kind of focus here on Fort Worth and Tarrant County. Are you hopeful for our community as a whole?
Oh yeah, I think there's no perfect communities. Period. Doesn't matter about how much money, what racial makeup, whatever. In my Bible study this year, we did a study, Bible study fellowship. We studied Old Testament, Israel, and the minor prophets. And man, 2 Kings, man has never changed. Human beings haven't changed. It's always about oppressing someone. It's always about uplifting someone. Mm. And so the only difference in man is technology. Cars, iPhones, we got more stuff. But the human spirit has always been the same. So in terms of Fort Worth, I have a lot of hope. I love Fort Worth. For me, it's the best city in Texas, period. Nothing against, there's bigger ones, richer ones, faster ones. It's just something about this city that people are as straightforward as I've seen. Yeah.
That's good. And so, as a person and a man who's accomplished so much, you've seen the world, do you still feel motivated to accomplish things, or now do you feel like you're just,
no.
I've done enough?
See, I only think about these accomplishments when people like you want to talk about them, and I'm glad to talk about them. But I mean, I don't walk around thinking about, hey man, I'm blessed. Those are blessings.
Right.
Those are all blessings, from seeing Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay come to my brother's 12th birthday party, all the way to sitting here with you. I mean, this is my most important moment. This one right here. Not the one yesterday, but this one right here. And the next one will be, that's the way I live it. So.
And so when we look up and we're 30, 40 years from now, and, you're still doing your philanthropy.
30 years after, I'll be 97.
You're still active doing your philanthropy, providing awareness for depression, and we're at your retirement party.
Right.
We're at your third or fourth retirement party at this point. How do you want to be remembered?
That I gave it all I had. I did try to do everything I could humanly possible do. And that my story is far from the greatest one. And just try to love people. I just love people. I love people. I just like people. And, so many stories I could tell you that people have tried to put me in a box, and I just won't let. It's just not going to put me, and don't let anybody put any. Who has the right to put anybody in a box?
Right.
I mean, you come into this law firm here. I mean, when you were 12, did you think you would be in the position you're in?
No, not at all.
No. So for me, it's about encouraging. Leah says, everybody doesn't know at the third grade that they want to be an artist or what they want to be. And I agree, but I say we have to find out what our kids want to be and encourage them to do that. Now, if I had a dream of say, well, I want to be the center for the Dallas Mavericks, well, that's not possible. But I can, if I want to be around sports, you could take that child and say, hey, or tell her, become a writer, become an agent, become this, become that. It's,
That's good. That's good. This conversation has been everything that I thought it would be.
I appreciate it.
And I'm glad that I know you have a lot of opportunities, but I'm glad that you allowed me to sit down and have this conversation and learn a little bit more about you, but also be willing to share it with our audience. So really and truly, thank you for your time. And I know off camera, I'm going to hear a little bit more about these stories too.
All right. So, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I have. And Barry, really and truly, thank you for sharing your story. And, I hope if we make the impact of just one person,
absolutely,
we've done our job. But thank you really and truly again.
Absolutely.